we're gonna start. I'm very, very, very happy to, almost see you all here, or see many names and usernames in this virtual room in the cyberspace. So I'm Lorraine Furter. I am here currently in Brussels in a neighborhood called Forêt. In my apartment. I guess a lot of people in the evening are then in their apartment. I hope my heating or my fridge is not going to make too much noise during this session. As I said before, I'm also going to try to admit people in while I'm speaking, which is a difficult exercise. So I'm going to give you a few info about where this invitation comes from and how it came to be. And then I will present also a platform that I did for this moment and for this occasion. And then I will leave the words to the collective mother tongue that I will introduce briefly. And then we're going to have a discussion. It's going to last maximum, like say 1 hour and a half, to not be too tired with our eyes and brains. And yeah, I'm just very much looking forward. You can, of course, use the chat if you want to raise things while we're going, but you can also keep your questions for afterwards in the discussion moment. So as I told you, I am Lorraine Furter. I'm based in Brussels. I am currently doing a research project that started actually while I was preparing some classes. I was asked to teach around publishing, contemporary practices, and also historical, a historical approach to publishing, and also the topic of artist books. And while I was preparing my classes, it was super challenging for many reasons, because preparing a class is super challenging. It's very, suddenly you feel the weight of the responsibility to have to choose examples and artists and objects to show. And I really realized how biased were the stories that I could learn myself, and also the ones that I would find in books and even online and so on. It was a few years ago. Until now, things have changed a bit, luckily, and also thanks to projects that are led by the amazing people that are with us tonight. And basically, so first it started as like a project to try to work on what other stories could emerge, what other stories could be shared. Maybe also focusing on like details and anecdotes and gossips, why not, and all the things that are not maybe history with a big H and with his as a starting point. This led me to meet also a lot of beautiful projects, such as the ones of the collectives Mother Tongues and EAAPES. I will just briefly share my screen here to show you a platform that I built. I hope, no, okay, you don't see yourself because I see also the chat in front of it. So I built this platform. I do a lot of things for this research project. And one of my skills, let's say, that I learned along the years and a bit in a DIY way is to make websites. And for me, it's an amazing way to expand the notion of publication, not only as a paper thing, but also as potentially like many different kind of formats. And for me, the digital format is a place where I can play a lot. And here, so I started working on the question of translation. Again, it was via the fact that I was meeting, for instance, students, but also other researchers and myself, to some extent, people who had difficulties accessing objects and documents because of the question of language. And so it comes really from this kind of very practical dimension, also in the act of sharing, and also with the question, you could hear in my accent that I'm not an English native speaker. And so the question also is like, in which language am I going to express myself? To which communities am I speaking through those languages, and these kind of things. So I built this platform, this web page that you can find on speakingvolumes.space/translations. And here I gathered some references that I found very interesting, very challenging. And so here you see a few things from the project EAAPES. I don't know if you have another way to pronounce it, by the way, you will tell us in a while. Yeah, for me, it's also ways, because I didn't say it, but I'm trained as a graphic designer. For me, it's ways to also access or give some kind of physicality to things and to ideas and to text. And for me, it's quite important as a way to remember things, to make connections. So I also thought it would be nice to, you know, like build this kind of environment in which you can also manipulate things and make links. So you will see I've put as first elements and documentation my guests for this evening and these two sessions, because we had a first session with Clara and Charlotte, but in the end Charlotte was with us in our heart, but she was unfortunately ill this time, and here I'm very happy that she's with us today. We had the first moment with their project, and you can find some information about both projects that I can start presenting now with a transcription on the screen. So I met the project EAAPES through Clara, actually. And also through, I don't know if you can see me, but through the readers they publish as part of this project. So through this project, they're like documenting, researching, and also translating text, and also a lot of other materials around in the field of like queer and feminist science fiction. And it's really an amazing project. I named this series of events DIY and subversive translation practices, and I think that's something you see in this kind of objects, a very like hands-on and very like direct way to engage with the materials. There are a lot of things that are like scanned and put a bit almost as they were found, and I really like this this dimension. And then there's a whole work of translation that is being done by those two amazing persons, but also a big community around them. And along the way, when I was working on these questions of translation, I also met the project, I think, on social media this time, because I find a lot of things on social media, and I think social media is not often cited as a kind of research resource. But for me, for instance, Instagram is a big place where I find a lot of things that I don't find in other places. And so the collective mother tongues is a research-led project applying decolonial feminist and queer pedagogies to explore language and identity. They work on how language impacts personal and collective empowerment, and they work towards the democratization of archival collections and knowledge production. So I think there were many links, and I'm very much looking forward to also find out more about their project tonight with you. And then we'll be able to expand a bit this discussion with the public that is here with us tonight, and also with maybe some other examples of practices that are inspiring and that you can find again on this page that you can come back to. I like also this kind of tools as a way for preparing, but also documenting. So it has a before and after life. I think I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now and come back to you. And yeah, so I will not take too much time, too much longer, and just very warmly thank and welcome Kaya, Marina, and Vania. And I leave you the microphone.
Great, I'll just share my screen now.
Hi, everybody. So thanks so much, Lorraine, for inviting us here, and as well for your introduction. So just to add a little bit to our introduction, but Lorraine has pretty much covered it. So we're a collective that looks at interrogating histories and archives through language. And we started in 2018 by coming up with an idea of a translation party, which happened at the Feminist Library. And it was under this, I don't know how many of you are based in the UK, but Anti-University is sort of an annual event where loads of people just come up with different ideas, and Anti-University hosts it, and it kind of like as a way for like sharing skills and different like kind of like cultural exchange. So we applied and we did a translation party with the Feminist Library, and since we've continued doing translation parties because we thought there was still space for them to still exist. But we also expanded our program by collaborating with artists, researchers, thinkers, etc., as well as the community. Yeah, so put as an introduction on me, who I am. Along with Mother Tongues, I'm also an archivist and a cultural worker. So I'll pass you on to Kaya.
Everyone, I've got my camera turned off just to preserve the Wi-Fi while I share this presentation. But I'm Kaya, and I'm a student and researcher working within the field of psychosocial studies.
Can you hear me? Cool, thank you. So my name is Vania, I'm Bolivian, also part of Mother Tongue. I'm a producer and also a cultural worker.
So we thought we'll kind of introduce you to the concepts of how we work before we go into the different activities that we have been doing since our existence as a group. So multilingualism is kind of like a big part of what we do in our title and the translation party. So, and one thing that we look at is multilingual solidarities. So we look at multilinguals as a way for the community, as a way for the community to be empowered to express itself in different languages. We live in London, and there's no one English, not even within the English language, there's not even one, there's sort of different scales of English as well, but there's also different other languages that exist. And some of us grew up in households that didn't, like I personally grew up in a household that didn't speak English at all, like at home. So there's this sort of different realities that exist within the language that we communicate. then we're looking at a multiplicity of vernaculars, diaspora languages, looking at the Glish. Again, I don't know if it's a little like background for those who are like not familiar with the English way. So sort of like I grew up in a Cypriot household, so I spoke Griglish at home. So there's this different, you can find that with Spanglish and different other like diasporic languages that exist, regional dialects as well. You can look at the UK context as well, but also other places where they have dialects as well as more formal languages. Imagine it's similar in like different locations as well, and different accents too. We don't all have the same accent. And we're also looking at the amplification of queer, decolonial, migrant, and working class voices. So language is not only about the grammar, but it's also the culture behind it, the subjectivities, the histories, the identities, etc. And another thing that's really important for us is the different feelings that come with language. So what kind of feelings you feel when you're jumping from one language to another, when you're speaking one language, when you have to change your tone to be in a specific, more formal space, etc. So like all these different things that we're thinking when thinking about multilingual solidarities. And then I'll pass it to
So how do we define DIY translation? Translation as research, mapping a multiplicity of different knowledge, translation as recording, documenting different modes of knowing, and translation as a portal to accessing collections.
So one example of our practice and our way of thinking are translation parties. And these are events hosted at archives and libraries where people are encouraged to engage with archival materials and archival collections in interactive ways, particularly through translation and DIY, so like arts and crafts. And you can kind of see on the screen here some of the ways that we do that. So at translation parties, participants are encouraged to translate archival materials in various ways to discover and discover the narratives and gaps and alternative interpretations that might emerge. And people really come at it from different perspectives. So there are some people who will translate from their mother tongue into another language, people translating from the original language of the text to another. And then there are people who might have a special interest or research project, and they're really using this as an opportunity to kind of engage with that interest or project. So it's a bunch of people coming at it from very different perspectives and with different relationships to language. So what do these parties do? So two things that we kind of focus on through our translation parties is democratization and access of archives, archival materials, and translation as a practice, and also the refusal of respectability in terms of the archive as a space, as an institution, and with translation as a practice. So we've utilised translation parties to call attention to the circuits of power that run through these spaces, and we particularly use play and creativity as a tool of resistance. We found that the idea of having fun and being creative within the archive was often frowned upon, particularly the archive being seen as a space where academic study and particularly extractive forms of research are done, where knowledge is kind of gathered in the archive and then taken somewhere else. And so we really wanted to challenge that with our translation parties, instead looking at the archive as a space where people can take up space creatively and have generative discussions and introduce new ways of creating knowledge and looking at translation.
Also, translation parties do challenge dominant language systems and enable opportunities for emerge of various possibilities and interpretations. Being the dominant language, at least here, English, and what is believed, like the true and what other truths exist, and not just one. The communal learning, research, and interrogation. So we learn together by working together in this space and open the conversation and what we're looking at, and this idea that who's the researcher and who had the again, I guess, connected to the APES.
So yeah, so again, so taking it back to sort of like we're in a place where people come in to interpret histories or interrogate histories. So, and usually like in academic spaces, you write like a thesis or something. So we're just thinking about different ways of interpreting history and sort of like distributing the power within that. So challenging traditional research practices. So thinking of a way, you know, so we've been to loads of reading groups, which are really fun ways to challenge traditional research practices where people just read with each other. So it's also thinking about the translation as a way to research, not necessarily, although we did like generate some metadata from the translations, but it wasn't necessarily only about like creating like a sort of like final outcome, but it was also thinking about how translation is also a tool to research the specific material, and everybody came in with their own like understanding and lived experience of what translation means to them. So kind of like making that process visible and validating it in order to explore how languages can impact on personal and collective empowerment.
So we had here some samples of the work with pieces that have been translated in some of our past translation parties. And we have worked in this, some of the images are from the Feminist Library in the 56A archive. And one thing that I personally enjoy a lot from this is that the translation, sorry for the bad raw sound, the translations that we do are not all in a written way. So people is, like we were saying before, the translation from one language to another. But it's also when the translation, that oral part that happened at the end of our sessions, when we come together and we talk about the project that we have, the pieces that we're working, and so we're trying to read loud in the language that we had translate, and then explain a little bit and contextualize. And things are obviously in our archive are all and some update, they need updated and they need contextualized. So we do all that kind of translation, I think, and in that two different ways, as written and oral.
So yeah, so recently, our most recent translation party was at the Mosaic Room, where we were we had the opportunity to be invited to do a translation party with the archive that was on display as part of FECRA's Publishing Practices exhibition. The exhibition dealt with, talked a lot about translation, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean, and about the Cold War and the sort of like different propaganda around that. So it's a really interesting exhibition. So I would definitely like recommend you to go see, check FECRA Publishing work if you've not checked them already, especially when it comes to translation. We learned a lot from their practice. So we were invited after a period of kind of like not doing anything with the community in person. So we because of COVID-19, and we were just kind of thinking of how do we go back and what have we learned up to now, and what direction we want to take. So we kind of like called it 2.1. DIY translation parties, but we realized afterwards that not a lot of people might have knew what 2.1 meant. But for us, 2.1 meant is that we're going to we've learned something and we're going towards a new direction. Not new direction, but kind of like defining our practice. So one thing that we knew is that we're not linguists, so it's not about like literal translation, although we have had like the privilege of having translators come to our workshops, and talking to them was quite fun. We realized that we were more a creative way of looking at translation. So we wanted to look at archival futures. So because we talk a lot about the archive, what are the archival futures that we're envisioning, and how can we do that together through multilingual solidarities and speculative practice. So we're looking about how to reimagine, imagine, and using speculative approaches in translation. So through doing that, we're kind of like using translation as a tool to bring the archive alive, which is the outcome that we want. Looking at living histories, for example. So marking a move from the archive as a static site to a place of embodiment, enactment, and creation. And as I said before, introducing speculative approaches to our practices, which we'll show you in a bit how we kind of like utilize that. And then through the speculative part, we wanted to make the translation bit visible. Because usually, you know, we're all translating now, you know, but that process is not as visible. So we just wanted to sort of like slow down and create like a practice where we kind of like look at that in-between bit through conservations that engage with living histories and cultures. And then translation parties as portals to space-time travel. So yeah, using like translation. That you can apply DIY translation to reanimate present, past, and future stories.
So this is the zine that we created for our translation party with mosaic rooms. And we were really interested in exploring this idea of embodied practices. So focusing on what it means to be in the archive and to really engage in practices of translation in interactive ways. That, as Marina said before, sees the archive and the practice of translation not just as static things, but as organic and alive, that are constantly being changed and affected by the ways that we engage with them. And we really wanted to bring in this idea of speculative thinking, so speculating with other people about these living histories that we're engaging with through translation. And so we included some playful and experimental questions and prompts with the intention of encouraging new ways of thinking about language and about the ways that we embody the archive, really trying to subvert those Western and Eurocentric ideas surrounding the two and trying to create the opportunity for emergence of, again, bringing in these different cultures and ways of thinking about language and about translating that aren't reproducing power and hierarchy.
I will present an image of that, the mosaic from the translation party. And as you can see, it was during summer this year. One thing that I really enjoy also about translation parties is to bring people together through, you know, this idea. And using, in this case, I've seen they could, you know, start conversation with people that maybe be sometimes daunting to start this conversation. And by sitting in groups and tables, you can see how they start this conversation related to the text they will choose, because we put some different texts that we had took it from the collection that they had for the exhibition, and it was like at the difference that also interesting what they were interested to look at. The next picture, please. So in this one also was really great because, as I was saying before, translation in other way, translation also the creativity of the things that they inspired those texts to create something new. In this case, there were objects more 3D, as you can see on one side of the image, and the other, you know, using kind of a collage technique, and the other. And again, here you can see a little bit more of the text, people translating different language. And the next one, please. And in this one, something that we had experienced in the past is that there is people who may not know another language apart from, you know, English, and they use Google Translate for, you know, translate that may be another language to English. That in that way they find it easy, and sometimes 2 or 3 people working the same text to make sense of things, because Google Translate is obviously sometimes it's not a perfect translation, but they use their common sense to create something, even if it's a little translation. It's very significant how you can use technology. And in the other one, it was about this stories with this person who came to the workshop, and she found something related to this poet, a very famous poet, and she created this little drawing in her memory. So she would say, because it's so famous, the image of this poet, she told me that I wanted to challenge myself to remember how it was. And then she showed me a picture of the real. It was like, oh yeah, it's very similar. Mm-hmm.
So another project that we work on is Ways and Rituals. And this is a communal multisensorial archive of sound and affect, which was created in response to the first year of COVID-19 when we were all living in lockdown, and for a lot of us experiencing isolation. So we did a call out to the public for people to create sonic playlists and share poems and other forms of sound, which served as like an open access archive on SoundCloud, which is like a public platform. And yeah, so we made this call out for people to kind of offer up their experiences of lockdown and isolation, and with grappling with all these new feelings and experiences that we were all going through. And I think at this time in particular, Vania, Marina and I were kind of thinking, you know, how do we incorporate practices of care into the work that we're doing with mother tongues, both individually and communally and across borders? How do we connect with people far beyond our reach, but also close to us? And this was really kind of the outcome of all of that thinking. And so those who responded to the call out, submitted songs, poems, we had spoken word, soundscapes. I think during this time, a lot of us were kind of trying to find new hobbies, reading a bit more. Some of us were just trying to catch a breath, really. So it was quite interesting to see the submissions that people had, because you could kind of see some people really tapping into like these newfound interests, and other people just using it as a space to breathe and to feel and to share that emotion and that exhaustion. And so when I was writing about this for my work, I kind of was reflecting back on ways and rituals, and I now see it as like a transgression of traditional archival practices, particularly through the use of audiovisual, and the way that this project was really able to attend to emotion as information, which traditional archives haven't always been very interested in. And so this was really kind of a project to retain and record and translate what is often left out of the archive.
So as Kaya explained, it was kind of like translating a lived experience into a shared playlist, a sonic archive. So this idea, you know, like archives, people collect them. So somebody collected audio pieces to put into a playlist and was very generous to share it with mother tongues that shared it with more people. And then so looking at translation as well, in that sense of like trying to translate what exactly we're feeling at a moment when it's a bit chaotic, like the what's going on. The narrative is just so also it was a fun and creative act of archiving and translating. Again, we're using translating very loosely, but also a lot of the songs, I think because of the platform that we've created, we've allowed for this sort of like messiness in language to exist. So we had calls from all over the world where people would jump from one language to another in their audio playlists. People from different places in Europe, as well as far, you know, like you had like Mexico, Japan, etc. So like, and these were kind of like how different, you know, it wasn't just sort of like one language after another. It's kind of like jumping from one place to another. So I think like it's because of who we are, that's why people feel that they can be quite messy with their collaging of different like acoustic narratives. Messy, like I like messy, so I'm not saying it in a bad way. I'm a messy person, so I actually think that's a good thing. And also like learning how to put a playlist together during a time, kind of like doing as a sort of like therapeutic thing of actually doing something and sharing it with people, because it's quite manual to put something together. yeah, and then act of intimacy within sharing, kind of like having this opportunity to like reach out beyond your like bedroom, living room, wherever you were at that moment. And I think the most important thing, especially for me, was we lived a time where nation borders became even more strict. I mean, they're already quite violent, and the narrative around them is very toxic. But we lived at a time where like these borders literally like kind of like grew higher. So in a way, yeah, well, they were keeping us safe, but also like what impact did that have on like translocal subjectivities? So yeah.
If you can please, this is one of the examples, it's one of my favorite. We can just listen 1 minute, please.
Reading has always been a safe haven for me, but in the past few months, I've struggled to concentrate in lockdown. And instead of starting new books, I found it helpful to return to favourite poems and passages in books to build my own small library of meditations on loss, joy, and defiance. I'm going to read 8 pieces and end with 1 mindfulness exercise. I hope they help you too. The Pillow Book of Se Shonagon. Things that lose by being painted. Pinks, cherry blossoms, yellow roses. Men or women who are praised in romance as being beautiful. Things that gain by being painted. Pines, autumn fields, mountain villages and paths, cranes and deer. A very cold winter scene, an unspeakably hot summer scene.
Thank you. You can listen more of our recent ritual in SoundCloud. We'll invite you for another time to do this. Thank you.
Cool. So the next thing that we'd like to show you is something that Lorraine has featured in the website, so please feel free to go and have a look. So again, bringing in, so close, bringing in COVID again. Before COVID-19, we were supposed to be traveling to Bucharest to work with the curatorial collective, quote unquote, on possibly doing another translation party in Romania. We don't know yet. We don't know because it never happened. We were still thinking about it. But then obviously we weren't able to travel, but quote unquote went ahead with the program, and they did their program online. Yeah, so mother tongue, so we created the Mother Tongues Library. I like to call it a gesture rather than a library because yeah, I guess as somebody who works in archives and libraries, the work that is needed into sort of like sustaining like a library and access and thinking all these things. And I guess we come from this well, all of us come from this background of like working within institutions. So we were just basically like thinking of this as a gesture of like, oh, what if there was like a Mother Tongues library? How would it look? And I think this is just the first gesture. So maybe we should just call it Mother Tongues Library Gesture, and then we'll keep adding different gestures. So we just thought, how would it look to just put different like texts next to each other from different like with different languages, texts from academics and writers and artists that talk about the experience of language next to each other, as well as thinking about as a place for people to just donate to the Mother Tongues Library, to kind of like put their texts there. And we did have a few that have donated their essays, just like kind of like without, you know, they just self-catalog it. But also thinking about possibly like the expansion of these texts of like being translated on and on and on and on and on by the people, or like I guess like the crowdsourcing, which is like a word that's used within the heritage sector of like crowdsourcing donation translations in a library. What would that look like? We still don't know because this is more like a gesture, but we're hoping that throughout time we'll continue adding like to these different gestures, and I hope that like it never becomes like a fixed term, like this is what a mother tongues library looks like. I just hope that like we can always like keep changing it to like adapt and keep learning to do things like that are of their time. Yeah. So Vania will go into a sort of like how we kind of like extended this gesture into something else and kind of like.
It's in line with what in general we do. It's very DIY. We're doing it. It's a work in progress. It's messy. It's never finished. And I think that has its pros and cons. And for me, have more pros. And one thing that we do also at Marathon is that we are looking at archival collection. We're trying to make it alive because of this idea of, you know, like it's great to save things for posterity, but we need to make it live. We need to make it accessible and use them. And how do we use them? And who is using it? So we were contacted by an academic and from New York, who is half Peruvian, and Susana Herrera, and she knew about our library, and it was great to work with her and to make something that was alive for something live for our library and connected to our library. And so we decided to work with the text of Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui, who is a sociologist and activist from Bolivia. And it was this specific text, and the idea was to have a bilingual reading group. So the text was available in both in English and Spanish. And on the day we would meet online, and there was moments where we'd be together, and then people could decide in what language they would like to work. And some people, you know, feel more comfortable, though they can read both. They could, you know, say, oh, I prefer to speak when people, you know, in my, you know, Spanish, and you know, because my mother tongue, and I feel more comfortable, or in English, and people who were comfortable with both. So we divided in small groups, and they had some questions and as a way to start conversation with each other, and then come back. So it was like hot, you know, 30 minutes in small groups, and then come back together to have a, you know, discussion what they've been talking in their small groups. And it was a fun experience, I have to say, for myself, to be jumping from one, you know, small room to another, and just in those breakout rooms to listen to conversation, to listen to different language. And I personally enjoy it a lot, and think again it's something that we would like to keep doing, and we're always happy and open to collaboration with other people. And these are our two publications that we had done, and it's very it's great to see it together, because like the biggest one is the scene that we did in our first translation party, and the more archival future is the one that we have done in our latest one. I don't know if you would like to talk a little, anyone of you, Marina or Kaya, would like to talk a little bit more about like our scene, the first one.
Well, yeah, well, it's on our mother tongue's library gesture, so you can feel free to browse it. But it's just so it's pretty much the archive and the translation next to it. So it's of the participants. It's quite fun. Yeah, feel free to have a look at it. It's on our Google Drive, and yeah. Yeah, and as well as archival futures, it's accessible for you to just look up online.
I think this was our nice way to finish looking at our two products.
Thank you so much for this super generous presentation. Yeah, if you want for this part, you can on the, I think on the top right part of your screen, you can like display a kind of mosaic with people, and if some of you want to put your camera on, or yeah, it can give a feeling of like who is in the room. Yeah, nice to see some faces. Yeah, I'm gonna then start a bit this discussion moment, and maybe I can ask, I don't know if it's going to be a question, but maybe I'm going to turn myself to Clara and Charlotte from the project EAAPES, which I say with the French accent. By the way, if you want to speak in another language than English because it's more comfortable for you, we can try to do a collective translation if needed. There is no problem with that. So I would maybe like to pass the mic to Clara and Charlotte. I think there are a lot of links somehow that can be made between the two projects, but also many differences. I think it's quite interesting because with the project of Clara and Charlotte, there is also this dimension of like organizing collective translation sessions, and this sense of like creating a community through shared interest. And in that sense, it's also more specific to one field, which is science fiction, and queer and feminist science fiction even more precisely. I was thinking when you were talking about like different Englishes and different languages, even inside one language, I was also wondering how it translates somehow to science fiction, because I guess there is, you know, languages like English and French, and then there are also very specific languages through science fiction work. So this resonated a bit in my mind, and maybe you have something to share about it, Clara and Charlotte. And maybe another dimension that I found interesting and that I wanted to ask you is we saw some multi-sensorial and multiple mediums developed with the practice of mother tongues. And what I know from EAAPES is the kind of printed materials and the text, also because I've never been into one of your sessions, translation sessions, but probably there are also other ways to materialize translation in science fiction, in your science fiction universe, let's say.
I think like about the fact that there is like lots of different Englishes, I think like the most it's like pretty close from mother tongue, but the thing is like we started from translating English because like it was the place, I mean the language place where there was like the most text available. But like the project itself at the beginning wasn't about languages, but the subject just like popped up really quickly. And like from the almost the beginning, we were like asking ourselves what we should do, because we knew we had like a really the access was limited by like focusing on English. So but we're not able to translate from like other languages like Spanish and English, and that's it. So like the idea was to also to make the research like larger, but we were limited. So we started translating text, first translating into English. So it was like maybe, for example, like Chinese novels or like short stories from, I don't know, from like Uzbekistan, or, you know, and but there was like this idea of like we should have like we should look for some people like able to translate from the original language, but it wasn't possible. So like mainly we're translating from English, but I guess it's like, I mean, it's not similar from mother tongue, but it's I mean, it's like just like going around as we can, because we're not like we don't like speak like 1,000 languages, so.
Yes, what I think it's interesting also, the funny link is that at the beginning, before EAAPES, I started a project called The Cheapest University, and it was also, it was more a project of like workshop, working with, inviting like artists, and also it was the idea of, okay, we wanted to share like many texts that some of our teachers in art school were giving to us, but many French don't speak English at all when you're at school. And the teachers always think that, oh, read this text. And like many students are like, okay. And they pretend they read, but they don't understand anything. It's always happened. And I don't know, but it was part of the idea at the beginning with Cheapest. Okay, let's try to do the best that we can, and let's start to translate some text. And even if we are not professional, we will do it. And it happened with many workshops, and EAAPES was one of them. There is also How to Become a Lesbian, another one. It was more about translation of poesy. But it's funny, I think there is like many links with mother tongue for that also. But yeah, I mean, you said, I think what Clara said also, it's that most of the texts were English, and because also like most of the science fiction that we have at the beginning was English. Now it's more also Spanish text, and we want to do it, but like, for example, for me, I only speak English, so I can't do other language anyway. But also there is this thing that, well, I mean, I realize that sometimes it's so I mean, it's really like a frustration to do that, and also, but because it's how to say that, c'est le seul outil, quoi. Yeah, that's the only tools that we have in our luggage right now. But well, I don't know, for the translation.
Yeah, it's also something that's about like tools that I really appreciated in your presentation, Kaya, Marina, and Vania. It was really the fact of sharing tools to make your projects and your protocols like accessible, not only during the moment, but also document it and so on. And I found it super interesting. And as well, yeah, this dimension of transformation that was quite present from one type of expression to another, and the collage and the welcoming sort of messiness, which has also limits, as Clara just said, like the DIY and like alternative way to work makes also that you run into some limits. For instance, when you don't know a language, and you have to go through another language, and it's not such a big deal, I think, because anyway there's translation and transformation, as you mentioned it very well. But at the same time, when it's always like those more imperialist language that we are also using tonight, it's I think it's also adding a layer of complexity. And it was actually one of my starting point, or not my starting point, but one of them, which was how to both at the same time, how to make some English text accessible, for instance, to my students or even for myself at some point. But at the same time, then without always only focusing there on what is produced in English. And so it's also very complex, this kind of dimension. And I guess I'm also looking for ways to complexify this. But again, for me, for instance, an experience that I did is I'm learning at the moment Armenian. which was in my family and was lost through generations. But again, I'm a bit facing this same problem, because even the process of learning is very complex, because there are not so many accessible texts. Also, I think there's this extra layer, because I'm also interested in specific kind of text. So I would love to read feminist contents and, you know, this kind of contents. And the access for me to this text is complex. So the first step is made very difficult somehow. I wanted to ask if people from the audience have a question to ask or something to add, or maybe also like tools to share or things that they experienced with translation, and maybe with this kind of idea, like a power dimension and so on. I'm leaving a bit of time to react. Not yet. Or I'm just checking in the chat.
I can respond to some of the things, like kind of like some things that we've come across. So firstly, the thing of like translating from and translating text from English that originates from other languages is really interesting. Some of the things that we've been talking about is like how text, like in our translation parties and with different artists, collaborators that we've worked with, is how text that has come from different other languages or dialects, localities, etc., like how they arrive into English and then it changes so it can fit in sort of like a Western canon. So like we worked with, for instance, the artist Samra Mayanja, who's was looking at this, shows us this film from Uganda, and it was a marriage scene, and it had the like direct translation of like, shall death do you apart? And she was like, that's not what it says. Like, it's completely different. But they had to like do the text to sort of like fit. And so this sort of like, so this idea of like, you know, it's only done from grammar to grammar. Sometimes we actually do translate from culture, and it's kind of like this could build a wall of not understanding kind of like the difference. So word, you know, there's a difference there, and it's fine, you know. But also like been watching quite a lot of like K-drama during lockdown, and I've been depending on Twitter to find out what the real translation, because Netflix is just based on like, you know, how they have to have the like language to fit, like, you know, to read, to communicate and stuff like that. But actually sometimes it's kind of like it doesn't really translate. They have to do it in a way that's kind of like fits, so it's efficient, and also like for like a Western audience. So sometimes I'm just like, what do they read? You know, like you can find a lot of stuff, like a lot of people on Twitter that like also watch K-drama kind of like telling you, no, this is not what they really meant, and this is actually like doesn't really translate properly. So it's quite interesting that you're doing it from, and completely understandable, because everything is translated into English. It's like cultures don't translate, you know, it has to go through like the English language. And then with regards to the thing about the academic, I think what we were doing was very similar, I agree, but with sort of more like archives and histories of sort of like, oh yeah, how do you come in? But you know, you need to prepare the space to make it accessible to people. Yeah, and language plays quite an important role in that. And then also, I don't know if you know about this, but like in institutions, before you publish something on for like press and marketing reasons, it has to go through like this weird test that's done via like an app on Outlook. Like simplifies the language, and sometimes it doesn't even make any sense. so using these automated systems to sort of like simplify language to make it accessible to like people who are, you know, English is not their first language, or who are you know, like to like different backgrounds and stuff like that, kind of might sometimes turn against us rather than for us. But yeah, just sort of that.
But there's oops, sorry.
I have a simplifying app called, so okay, so basically I used to go into, because I had to do that when I was at work, so you just go open Outlook, and then there's this thing where like it runs a test, whether it's like it's via Outlook, the email, and then it says like, it gives you like a percentage of like how readable it is.
Talking a little bit about like the K-pop, or like I was thinking about like something that I love a lot of international films that I love Kiarostami, but and I always wonder now, like there is the language barrier for me. Obviously, I don't speak Farsi, so I think like what I'm missing because I don't understand, but also in terms of visual language. So what is maybe, you know, say with the image that I can understand, because culturally, you know, I'm not from there. So there is also a translation, I guess, there, but it will be very helpful for me.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something about like what you were saying, Marina. It's like also I think it's a bit frustrating for us because, as you said, like so many languages don't really translate well into English sometimes, and I think like for us, like translating from English like raised so many questions about our own language, like that is French. And I think like translating from different languages would like allow us to ask many more questions about the French language itself. And it's like not possible when you're doing only with English, because of course we like challenging like gender issues in like French language, because English is so much more like malleable. I don't know how you say that, but like you can like the grammar is less gendered, and so like when we translate into French, it's like lots of these questions. But of course, when you're translating from like a non-European language, it's like completely different. And I don't know, maybe like from Japanese, you would like the problems would be like completely different, you know. And yeah, that was more what I wanted to say about that.
I feel the same because I speak Greek as well, and Greek is so gendered.
Yeah.
Like I always have to use like everything has a gender. So but yeah, but also I guess like there's the other issues with like the English language of the power within that as well. The English is such a problematic language, but it's a language that we're using, and how do we work with that? I don't know, like yeah, there's a lot of questions around that.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, for instance, to give concrete examples of, for instance, myself organizing this, I have as a challenge, is that, so I started gathering documentation that are in different languages on a web page, and so far things are going quite well. I mean, I'm putting stuff with different languages. I don't have yet different scripts on this page, but here again, when you add different scripts, you need to find fonts that match and that have the script available, and then reading directions is not always so easy to handle on a web page. But then comes the question as well, am I going to translate everything that is on this page? Because I don't have the time yet, no. But then we had the discussion with Clara, that I originally, when we discussed with Clara and, oh sorry, I did a mix of your two names, with Clara and Charlotte, we thought they told me they would be maybe more comfortable speaking in French, also because that's how the project is mostly being done. It's with other languages, but towards French. And so I thought like, okay, that's an interesting like challenge, that we're gonna do the discussion in French, and then we have their presentation in French, and then we have a moment with mother tongues, and who is a collective that don't speak French. So here there's a kind of translation that needs to be made. And I thought it would be quite an interesting way to switch from one language to another, which is organizing a moment in a language. And then because you want to share it with another collective or other people, then you're going to do the work of translating it to another language. And I was thinking it could be a nice protocol for also making a project travel and having maybe not everything translated, but parts that are translated and taken towards another project. And of course, then it would start with French and then English, but it could go also somewhere else. And I was thinking also in terms of, you know, I am paid as a half-time researcher, but I also have a tiny budget to invite external people. And actually, it's you today with whom I'm using this budget. But I was also thinking maybe this budget could be in the future used in translation, and maybe in languages that I cannot translate to words. And maybe I could do a translation in Armenian, because actually I would need that as a kind of training material and learning material. And then it would also create something for and invite a wider community. And also, I think it's now I recently felt a lot that I need to learn also Arabic, because I'm meeting a lot of people and objects for which that I cannot read and that are not translated. And yeah, I think it's also interesting what it makes in your body and in your mind, the kind of switching of mindset and meeting objects and people. So yeah, I'm just I see the comments in the chat, but I'm also just like sharing a bit the thoughts that are in progress on my side, and I don't know if it resonates with others' concerns or yeah, ideas.
I think I'm coming in again. I think that's definitely a great idea, because I feel, yeah, we're not translators mother tongues, we're looking about the more creative way, like kind of like exploring it as a concept, the different like aspects about it, but thinking about supporting more writers, artists to produce work in the languages that they feel more comfortable with. I am a bit like with mother tongue, sometimes I feel a bit like although like I like the name that we've chosen, but sometimes I don't like the word mother tongue. I don't mind mother tongues, but I don't like mother tongue because that kind of brings back like sort of like nation state and stuff like that. There's dialects and stuff like that. So, but I think that if we can support more people to write in their languages that they feel most comfortable with, like Nugiwathiongo says that, you know, yeah. Translation is good. I don't need to write in English because there's translators, so they can always translate me into like other languages.
I think that's also what we're trying to do with the readers that Lauren was showing before, because like alongside with like essays or interviews or like newspaper articles, stuff like that, we also publish like writers, like contemporary writers that write in French, and that are like few of them are published in France yet, because they're not like writing novels, or like they trying some like different kinds of literature that are not like classic, I may say. And And so we're also trying to put forward like some people, I don't know, like just like taking French language and trying new stuff with it in the field of science fiction or like more fantasy or stuff like that, and feminist, of course. And that's, I mean, like maybe that's the similarity with your project, because like the idea is also to like reappropriate your own language, and you know, not trying to fit in some stuff you could like send abroad all the time, and that can also like shine. I don't know like how to say that, but like, you know, like also like stay a bit more into like the language community you're in, and not like go straight ahead like really far away, but like just trying to use your own, I don't know, like your own tongue.
Hello, I wanted to say I feel like translation of term might be a bit too concrete, because you're really looking at musing and philosophizing on language and like subjective readings of different models of thought that are being brought forward to you by the English language, say. So translation is usually I guess more restrictive, and you can like work against it, but really I feel it's like more feminist practice of allowing for a lot of subjectivities that are not, as you say, rooted in mother tongues necessarily, but more the depth of one's inner world, which might or might not be informed by different cultures and languages.
Yeah, indeed. I'm not sure if I understood very, very well what you were saying, but I'm gonna try to, you know, work with how it's translated to my brain. But what I find interesting in my understanding of translation is also what you mentioned before, Marina, is also all the different ways to write, even in one language, and Clara just mentioned it again. And I think already thinking to go back to what you were saying with the simplified English or simplified language, it's something that I didn't work on a lot, but that now I'm more and more interested, and it's relating the kind of different languages you can speak within a language, and also how to make something accessible by maybe not necessarily multiplying, but still testing different ways to speak even within one language, or to write, and because speaking maybe it's more difficult because it goes it comes out of one's mouth, and as you said, there are many different I don't know how to say it in English, actually. Sorry. Situations, for instance, in the day when we are not using always the same kind of vocabularies or these kind of things. But through writing, I think there are also potentials to really take some time and try to find ways to translate thoughts in different ways, and speaking to maybe different people through different ways of speaking. And I don't know if you yourself you made some experiences or experiments within one language to try to translate in different ways. I don't know if it's clear. I'm sorry, I'm tired. I mean, you did it somehow with the collage and the use of images.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know for me, well, I only speak English, so I don't think for me it was so much finding different ways to experiment within a language with translation, but I think a lot of the work that we've done with mother tongues and for myself has been about experimenting with translation through different mediums. So I think you really see that with like the translation parties, again, through this like medium of like arts and crafts, something really tactile that you can feel, and also with sound, with the Ways and Ritual project that we did. And I think particularly Ways and Rituals, using sound, music, spoken word, just soundscapes was really a way to kind of experiment with everything that can't be said through words and through language. And so that's kind of like in two aspects. I think on one level, it's the barriers that we face with language, with translation, with power hierarchies that run through language that kind of restrict certain forms of expression. But then also just with language as a structure itself, I think for many of us, there are often times where it's like just words just aren't enough to truly convey an emotion or an idea. And so I think really communicating with different mediums kind of, I think Anastasia, you were talking about translation as being quite restrictive, and I completely agree. And moving to different mediums and also coming back to this idea of like embodied practices. How do we embody these different languages? How do we move beyond words to the realm of like more than words? And I agree with Anastasia, that's a feminist practice, you know, it's a decolonial practice that I myself have been drawn to as someone who has been severed from my mother tongue through different histories, as being someone who's kind of lost that connection. I think coming back to like medium and method and tactile and back to the body and the sound is really effective and breaks through some of that restrictiveness.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you say, because you know I live in the UK and I'm not a native speaker, and I just came to a point where I now perform in fantasy language because I kind of want to give that opportunity to people that are really looking for exact translations, and for me to also serve them in English the opportunity to just dream up scenarios in their head, because there's no right or wrong. I don't follow a script. I'm just improvising with sounds and yeah, my own kind of fantasy language. And it actually is quite hard for people to let go of this like distinct, am I getting it right? Do I know what she's talking about? And actually looking at the body language, the facial expressions, and also just, you know, being confronted with someone who's culturally different. So I've kind of switched it around, but I do speak English. I just was tired of serving the kind of dominant language and came to fantasy language through that.
Yeah, I think that's like a speculative practice of like right now things like recognizing that something is like restrictive and that there's a lot of power hierarchy running through that, and kind of like you said, dreaming up something different. I really like that. I think that's really cool.
What do you call a fantasy language?
Sorry, what?
What do you call a fantasy language?
It's the type of chanting I'm doing, or like ranting, or you know, so I'm Russian and I've been raised in Germany, and I lived in France as well, and I just remember not speaking any of these languages in the countries I came to, and finding it really exciting to not know what people are talking about, and really, you know, basically what you're doing, you know, just like interpreting, thinking about stuff without this like linguistic angle necessarily. And then I thought of like, yeah, sharing something really subjective and interviewing people what they think I was talking about or singing about, and just kind of yeah, noting their images, because people have different references. Everyone's like hearing, understanding, interpreting things differently, and I find it super exciting and valuable.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I think like one thing that we've learned from our translation parties and from working together as a group is that we have all different experiences, even if like we group it with, you know, we can group with people that have like speaks, you know, the same two languages as us. We all have different like ways of like interpreting this translation, and that's what's been really nice, because it's just been a multitude of voices and sharing in a sort of like nice environment about how, you know, our experiences. Another thing about multilingualism and like speaking, some people can suffer from like sadness from not activating a language that they might have carrying, or do you know, so sort of like when they're forced to like not speak that language, that kind of like can have an impact of feeling sad. And I just thought that so like when you were asking about more of a personal level rather than the cultural level of like it could have a negative impact if we, you know, so it's kind of like a nice space to like just, you know, just speak it. Or also this idea of what sometimes it's okay to just withdraw and not be in a intersectional space. Sometimes it's okay to just like be in a space where you can speak like another language that's not a dominant language, a multilingual language, and then you can come back to that and kind of like you kind of like balance how you move around in different spaces.
Do you have feedbacks from people like taking part of your translation parties who are like going back to their like mother tongue because of I mean like thanks to you?
In what way, sorry, do you mean? Sorry? I mean, we had people who come and they like the idea and they come to different versions that we do. And they like the idea of, you know, coming to use their language, but I don't know if that's what you mean.
I think sometimes it won't be like going back to their language, but sometimes because London is a very like, you know, like people from all over the world, like different people speak different languages in different places, but it's more like, for instance, if you know, like being queer, sometimes you need a space, you know, you speaking about being queer in an English sense, but then maybe sometimes it's not as easy to talk with your family for different reasons, you know, like, or maybe the vocabulary like has not been built because of like, I don't know, like, but some people have expressed that they're kind of like coming to translate queer texts into their mother tongue that they speak at home, rather than you know, learn the language, but to just basically like engage with more queer language.
Yeah, I think some people who I've spoken to at these events, and also just like the feeling of being in the room, is that for a lot of people who kind of have been, I guess, isolated from their mother tongue, there's a lot of heavy feelings around that and like fear of like getting it wrong. And I think there's something about being in a space where creative practices are like really centered. There's kind of like this excitement of being able to come back to it, to revisit, I suppose, to kind of come back home to something that is familiar, but also something that, you know, has a lot of distance to it. And I think, yeah, that's kind of what's really powerful about the angle that we come at translation from a creative avenue, is that it takes out a lot of the fear of getting it wrong. And that's something that I've just really noticed, is that it's kind of just like a place where you can kind of just breathe and like just have a go at it, really.
Thank you.
But then realizing that wrong is the right way all this time. Like, do you know, like what we perceive as like wrong is like, actually that was right.
Yeah, and that there were never really any rules to begin with.
But also like when translating from a language to mother tongue, a lot of people kind of like crosswords because they think they're inappropriate as well. So like this idea of like content warning, also like choosing to like not directly translate like violent narratives, but actually interpret them in another, do you know what I mean? Kind of in that sense. So sometimes, yeah, sometimes we can be, maybe these are the restrictions of translation, that sometimes, you know, we can put like a note or something, figure out a way to like explain that, like, especially if it's like an older text or like even like current text, like in that sense. So yeah, so we had like, was translating, yeah, like feminist text, French, like it was basically like a French feminist text, a journal that was looking into Africa, and then a person who is mother tongue is French came, and then they were just interrogating French. So I guess like that's closer to you as well. Like so they were also like interrogating their mother tongue as well. Like, oh, maybe like this feminist practice journal of that time. You know, like we need to talk. You know, the translation I'm doing is not only like a literal translation A to B, but also kind of like this is colonial practice within feminism.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really super interesting. I really love also, yeah, somehow that what is happening now is more like you know, a kind of discussion about experiences and about like very somehow also situated ways to live and personal relations through language and things you heard during the workshops and the parties that you are organizing. And yeah, I think it's really nice. I'm very happy to hear all these things. Yeah, just wanted to share that. Also, Vania had to leave, and maybe we can slowly round off this moment. I don't know if there are still some urgent things you would like to share, also with the people who are still with us in the room. I'm leaving a bit of silence to leave space. Yeah. So yeah, I think we can maybe just round up here. But yeah, it was super interesting. Thank you so much for all the things you shared, like tools, experiences, and many nuances. And I think one of the very strong part is I find is this collective dimension, which allows for having very different approaches and very different ways to relate to this question of translation. And I'm really looking forward to see you again and to discuss further on these questions. And it makes me want to continue working on that, and also interrogating my own relation to language and how I organize things. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for bringing
Merci, oui, merci, Lauren.
Merci.
Thank you all for attending, and I will also publish. We will talk again with mother tongues and EAAPES to see how things are documented on the webpage. But definitely there's going to be a trace of this, and I'm looking forward to see a bit how it's going to take place and what are going to be the future translations and transformations. Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you hopefully live soon.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.